game is about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Hello, my name is Interactivity, and let's write some code together, shall we? What we have on the menu today is, in part, this waveform display plugin that we have been working on for the longest time. But really, it is about having knobs and sliders and that kind of thing, like buttons on the user interface over here. So the user interface that we draw. Okay, a bit of recap in case you're new here. Here's what we have been up to since the last October in these almost daily live coding streams. We are doing audio effects in real time in REAPER. We are focusing on the graphics, the user interface. And we have made this component that it shows the waveform as the audio is being processed. That can be useful for things like a compressor. It can show the compression on the waveform, which can be kind of cute. And what we worked on yesterday and are going to continue working on today is this notion of being able to interact with this without having to resort to sliders and drop-down menus. And there are two reasons why I think that this is useful. The first is that it can be more intuitive to lay out sliders and knobs and controls over here on the user interface that we draw. So we can group things together more neatly, and things that can be knobs, perhaps will be knobs instead of sliders that take more space. And we will have more control overall over how we present things, and that's a good thing. We can also make it look better, probably, which is also nice. But then there's the second reason. And the reason is that this plugin in particular is intended to be used on the mixer control panel or on the track control panel, so embedded in the REAPER user interface, not as a standalone plugin, but embedded in here. Right, for visualization purposes. That's the point of this plugin. And over here, we will not have sliders or drop-down menus. Perhaps we could have some sliders if I think that there is a way to show effect parameters on panel. So like zoom, and then if I move this down or if I move this up, I don't know what that is, but I think that there is a way. I forget how, but there is a way for you to show parameters for an effect over here. Perhaps it's not, did I put it here? Does that option put it here? Yeah, okay. That option put it here. So perhaps if we had the plugin on the track control panel, then we could interact with the plugin like this by changing the slider here. And as you can see, the waveform gets bigger as I do that. But this is not ideal, and it's limited how much you can do with this kind of thing. So in this case that we want to have the plugin work here, it is essential that it can respond to user events like clicking and dragging over here. And that's what we have so far. Kind of neat. We can click and drag, and we can also double click to reset the zoom. which is not how other things work in REAPER actually. To reset other things in REAPER, oh yeah, we double click. So there you have it. Yeah, we implemented the right behavior. And we did this yesterday, and I have already forgotten about it. Good on me. Great job, Leandro. Anyway, so what we are up to today is to make this notion of clicking and dragging and double clicking contextual. And that's what I mean by a more sophisticated, how did I call the stream? A more sophisticated what? Mouse interactivity, I think. More sophisticated mouse interactivity. Yeah, so that's what I call more sophisticated mouse interactivity. The notion of contextualizing this, because right now we are only detecting clicks or double clicks, and we are detecting click and drag anywhere on the interface. So let's start really simple and just have the notion of capturing click and drag, or I guess we start capturing the drag. Okay, so here's how this has to work. We can click in the interface and drag outside the interface, and that works. You can see that the zoom value is changing. But if I just click outside, of course, it doesn't work. If I click here and drag, it does not change the zoom value. So what we want to do is something similar to that, where you have to click in this box and drag, and then you will be affecting the zoom value. But the cute thing about this, the trick, is that the click has to start in the box, but the drag doesn't have to be in the box. So we have to, when you click in the box, we have to get into this stage that is the dragging stage. And then we listen for movements of the mouse, even if the movement has occurred outside our bounding box. In essence, I think that we will need to use a tool that I mentioned yesterday. We tried to use yesterday, but it turned out not to be the ideal tool for what we were doing yesterday, and that is a state machine. And the reason why it was not ideal for what we were doing yesterday is that the state machine we had was for capturing double clicks. So it was for treating the case where you have one click and you're waiting for the next click, and there is a time that you wait. And if a second click doesn't come in, you forget about the double click, right? It's not a double click if the two clicks are too far apart in time. So the reason why a state machine didn't really work in that case was that the state machine would only have two states. And moreover, we would like to keep a notion of timing between the states. But that's not the case here. If you click and drag, you can be pressing the button, you can be holding down the mouse button forever. And when you drag, we should still be listening to that. So there is no notion of timing in this case. And in this case, there are more states. We will have the state of nothing is happening on the box. We will have the state of hovering on the box. So put your cursor on top, but don't click. And that is mostly for affordability. So we want to maybe change the background color of the box. We want to do something that will signify to the user that they can interact with this component. It's like putting a knob on a door. You are communicating to the user, the person who wants to open the door, that that's where you put your hand. Affordability. Anyway, so we will have a hover state. We'll have the initial state, nothing's happening. We'll have a hover stage. We will have an active stage. So when you click, or I guess when you press down the button of the mouse and don't let go, just press down and hold, you are in the active stage. And then when you release, you are back into the initial stage. And there may be more events that we are interested in. For instance, the double click event will be treated specially somehow. But to begin with, I will start with the state machine with this state. So there are now more than two. So there's the initial stage, the hover stage, the active stage. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that a state machine was not the right solution yesterday. In fact, what we have implemented is sort of a state machine, but we didn't have an enumeration of states and transitions between the states, all of that explicitly. We left all of that, I guess, implicit, so to speak, by virtue of just using a counter. So if the counter was 0, we were in the initial stage, and if the counter was greater than 0, we were in the, I guess, waiting for second click stage. That's better. Right. So let's get down to the code. This is what we wrote yesterday. It's very much a work in progress. It's not ideal yet. And we are writing the code directly on this effect. Later, we will have to extract things into the library. But this is the minimum we have to do to get something. So seems good enough. And I don't really know what to call this concept. It is not really a button. I don't think of this as a button, but it kind of behaves like one in the sense that you can click, you can hover. I don't know what to call this. An active area, a pane, an interactive element. I don't know. I don't know what to call this. For the time being, I will call this a button, but I don't love it. Anyway, so we'll have this state machine. I guess I will draw a diagram of what I was talking about. So we have the initial stage. Then you press down the mouse. Or not even that. You just put your mouse in the area occupied by the button. That gets you into the hover stage. Then you press or you hold down. So we have the down event. We have implemented that yesterday. So we have the down event. And that puts you in the active stage. And naturally, there are ways for you to get from these states back into the initial stage. So from hover, you may not press down the button of the mouse and instead just leave. So I guess I will not say put, I will say enter, because that's the name used in JavaScript. And leave is also the name used in JavaScript for mouse events. Leave, I guess I will not say your. Leave mouse, enter mouse in the area, leave mouse from the area. And when that happens, you will get back into the initial stage. And also, from the active stage, you may return to the hover stage. Yeah, that's right. That's kind of interesting. You can return to the hover stage in case you let go of the mouse. So the up event may take you there. I don't know why I'm being so careful about the drawing that I will throw away in a moment. Anyway, so the active may get you back to the hover stage, but it also may get you back into the initial stage directly. That happens when you have left the area and then released the cursor. in that order. And what is more interesting, and perhaps we will not have that as a stage in the system, but perhaps we could, I don't know. Maybe we could have a state in the system that is, you are active, but you are not hovering. Yeah, because you may click, so you may press down the mouse and then leave the area. In fact, that's what you are going to do in this case. You're going to click and you're going to drag, so your mouse will leave the area. But the area is active. So perhaps this is not a state machine, because you may be hovering without being active, just by putting your cursor there. You may be active without being hovering, or it may be both. And there are buttons that will behave differently depending on the stage. So this is not a single variable that is the stage. It is at least two. So it's not really, well, I was going to say that it's not really a state machine. If you really wanted, you could represent this as a state machine with just having more states. Suppose that you have a stage that is active and hover. So you could go from hover, when you press down, you would actually get here. And then if you let go of the button, you would get back there. But if you don't let go of the button and drag your cursor away, you would get into this stage. So you could represent this as a state machine, but I don't think it's super useful to represent that as a state machine. I think it's more useful to represent this as a set of on and off switches. And there will be events associated with the states changing, or I guess these different properties of hover, active, and so on. They can change, and there will be events related to that. So I guess on hover and on unhover, so to speak. Yeah, let's write some code. And I guess the first thing I'm going to do is to change the order of this, because I will want to change the background color when you are on hover. And for that, I will need to draw after having handled the mouse events. And I guess that makes sense, because typically the JFX block is going to run, and it will call this function, and that is the function that will be responsible for dealing with all these mouse shenanigans, and will just hopefully give you the information you need to start doing things like drawing the background color of the waveform the right way, and that's that kind of thing. So it makes sense for me to move this code up, because in the library it will occur at this point, and also because the order makes sense. I guess typically the loop of drawing something to the screen is handle interactivity, then do the actual drawing. Yeah, so let's get to the hover stage. For the hover state, I will need to know the coordinates of the box, and luckily I have that already. These are the coordinates of the box. No, they are not. These are the coordinates of the box. Are these? I said that we wanted to deal with mouse events before we begin drawing, but we would like to know the coordinates before we do the mouse events to know if we are hovering. Well, I guess we will have some sort of function in the library. I'm thinking of this section as library code. So I guess we will have some sort of function in the library. Yeah, let's start with this. I don't know. I guess I will just, for the moment, pull all of this up so that it is available to us. It is kind of hacky, and I'm not even going to cut, I'm just going to copy so that later I can remove this code because I don't like it. But with that, we can finally ask, are we hovering over this box? How do we determine that? We look at the mouse X position, and it needs to be between this and this plus that. So let's get both variables. So how do we know if we are hovering? The mouse X position will be between this and that. And the same thing with the Y position. So the mouse needs to be after this and needs to be before that. But that's not all. We also have to do this for the Y coordinate. And there you have it. So with this, we know that we are hovering. So let's do something to show that we know we are hovering. It will be before we draw this box or after. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, I guess I will do it here. I think of this as like auxiliary stuff that happens before we, or that happens when we have the effect here. So the instructions and the little box and everything. So I will do, and I guess I will do this even here, because if the samples are not being collected, I will not have the background color change. Yeah, right. But before we actually draw the waveforms, because we want to draw the waveforms on top of this background color. So I can check if I am hovering, I will. Is that how you draw a rectangle in JSFX? Because I forget. No. Graphics. Rect. Yeah, they abbreviate everything, so I will never remember. But I think I got it right. Anyway, what are the dimensions? They're these ones. But that's not all. We also have to set the color. Oops, syntax error. It didn't like this. What did it not like about this? The lack of the comma, that's what. Yeah, all right. So perhaps I want to draw this square after. right? Um, so that it contains, yeah, I guess I will do that. You know what? If the effect is bypassed, I think we could skip a lot. We could skip even this part. And that will surely fix things. Yeah, I think that the order is right now. Let's give this a try. There you go. Very subtle, but kind of nice. Ideally, or I guess not ideally, but I think I would like this even more if we could be fancy and do a transition. Instead of just immediately highlighting as you enter, we could have a transition into highlighting. But that is not something I'm going to do because it is a bit complicated. We would have to have a color and interpolate to that color. It's not the end of the world. It isn't super hard to do. It's just not something I want to address right now. So we got this working. Excellent. There is this issue that we are drawing on top of the box here, and it's starting to annoy me more and more. I think that what I will do is draw the waveforms and then draw the box. Because that way the box will cover the little glitch. That will work. Great. Yeah. Oh, but hang on. How is this working? Oh, because this is set and remembered next time. Yikes. Yeah, it really is time for me to extract this to the top. And I guess we already did, right? We extracted this over here. Yeah, we can remove that. I said I didn't like it. It's gone now. And all of this can go along with that. And because all of these are gone, this block is empty, so we could negate this and get rid of all of that. Okay, let's double check. We compute the coordinates. We draw the hover. If we are not on the TCP MCP, we need to rename this. Is embedded in TCP or MCP? That's what the variable name should be. Much better. Hey Fotis, great to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Oh, and we were just talking about this notion that we will draw the square after the waveforms. So let's get down there. And there you have it. Some simple reorganizing. Hopefully we didn't break anything. Yikes, we broke something. The colors are all weird. But at least the hovering is fine. But why am I drawing in the wrong colors? JSFX block begins, a bunch of mouse stuff that we are about to move into the library. Background color. I think that having the background color makes sense, even if the plugin is bypassed and not computing samples. So if you bypass, oh, this should not be drawing. Oh, I don't have any drawing function, so if I don't have any drawing function, it keeps the previous state, which I guess is sort of cool. Yeah. Yeah, nice. Okay, I'll take it. Then we compute the coordinates. That's good. Then we draw the little highlight. That's also cool. Then we do all of that to draw the waveforms. And then we get here. So at this point, we are passing along the color, it should be working. And even this color, it should be working. There is no reason for it not to work. We are setting the color. Let's commit what we have and start commenting out blocks of code to see where things went wrong. Okay, that's a simple renaming. And these changes are kind of big, but they are mostly just reorganizing sections. So I will not worry about it too much and just commit. So, okay, the issue is that these colors are wrong. I'm going to take out parts of the code to see where things went wrong. So if I take out the hover, I don't think that that will help, and it does not help. If I take out the drawing of the waveform, I think that that will help, but I don't know why. Yeah, that helps. Now, what about it is breaking things? We have some setup over there, and then we have this loop that is calling the drawing function and updating some coordinates. Let's just remove the drawing function for a moment. And that still works. That is so weird. Oh, I think I know what it is. It is the opacity. This drawing function will do something that is not 100% opaque, and the opacity isn't reset. That's what it is. So I guess I will introduce a variant of underscore color. I think that that is the more elegant solution. I could just have a JFX A or alpha of 1 to reset the alpha. perhaps the print function should receive an alpha. Yeah, I think it should. You know what, for the time being, just to make things work, I'll have a GFX A equals 1 here, but I will leave a fix me this, no, print should receive alpha. And color should have an optional alpha as well. All right, we are back into the working stage. I don't know if this translates well into the stream, by the way, but when I put my cursor here, it does highlight ever so slightly. It does highlight ever so slightly. So trust me, this is doing what it's supposed to. And it's looking good. Next. We have the hover stage. Now we need to check the active stage. Or we need to get into the active stage. So how do we know if we are active? And I realize that I am doing this as sort of a global thing because there is a single component on the screen. Later we'll have to find the right way to abstract this so that we could have multiple buttons on the screen. Anyhow, active. How do we become active? Either we become active because we are hovering and the down event occurs. Now, note there is a subtle thing here. This is not saying that the button is pressed, because I don't want you to be activating the button. I don't want you to be activating the button if you click and drag from outside the plugin. So, from outside the bounding box. If you click here and drag inside the bounding box, I don't want that to activate the button. So this would be doing that. It would be just checking if the mouse button is down, and that's not what I want. I want this instead, and this is the down event. It happens when the button is being pressed. So that's what I have here. If I'm hovering and the button has been just pressed, then I'm into the active stage. But that's not all, because that's a single frame. This event happens on a single frame. So there is another condition where the button was active and the button is still being held. Yeah, I think that this does it. To check this, let's go to where we draw the background color and change the background color on active. Okay, so the box is transparent. We put our cursor in there, it changes color. We click, and I don't think it changed colors. I don't think it did. Let's investigate the variables. I don't think that that worked. We have JSFX active. And does it ever become 1? It does. Oh, I think I know what's going on. It's the order. I am hovering and I am active, so I should be checking for active first. Okay, now it's working. And even if I do the thing I mentioned before, where I have the thing active and I go outside, it's still active. And if I come inside, it's still active. I still have my mouse down. When I let go, it goes back into the initial stage. And if I am dragging here and I let go, it goes back into the hover stage. Yeah, that seems to be working well. Awesome. I guess the next thing to do is, I was going to say the next thing to do is to limit the zoom movement to when you are in the box. But before we even get to that, let's see how this works here on the MCP. So there it is. And on the MCP, at least with the default theme, when you put your cursor on top of the little boxes, I guess this doesn't translate super well on the stream, because it doesn't translate super well here in real life. The contrast on the default theme is so bad, or at least to my eyes anyway. The contrast is so low that I can barely see a difference, but it does make a difference when I put my cursor here. And now it does make a difference when I put my cursor there. So it sort of resembles the rest of the interface, which I think is great. And when I click, well, it doesn't really highlight the little box that I clicked, but it does change the highlight. It goes back into the old highlight. Or perhaps it is even darker. I don't know. I cannot tell. Contrast is so low. But still, when I click and drag, this responds super nice. Awesome. Hello, Bo. Thanks for joining us. So now I bought this afternoon, I bought this teleprompter thing, which means that my second screen is actually the lens of the camera. Isn't that super nice? I can look at you and I can really see you there now. I can really see the chat as I look into the lens of the camera. And then on my way back from buying the teleprompter, I got hit by a car. So, such is life. I'm okay. But I did lose one wheel of my bike. I will have to buy a new one. Not a new bike, just a new wheel. Right, so this works well. Now let's do the thing where we only move the zoom if you are clicking and dragging inside. For that, I will bring all of this down. Because this is the part where we update the zoom and also where we do the double click work. And that is also updating the zoom. So we only want to do all of this or at least the double click. Let's start with the double click because it's easier. If you do the double click thing and you're hovering, then we reset to the default. Let's see this in action. Right now, before I reload the plugin, I can double click anywhere to reset the zoom. But now when I reload the plugin, if I double click outside the box, it does not work. If I click inside the box, it does work. That was easy. How about this? This is something that we only want to do if the box is active. In other words, if you press down, the event of pressing down the button has happened when you were hovering, so you are active, and the button is still down, or I guess just the active is good enough. Just being active is good enough. Because if you are active, it means that the button is pressed down. So this is a more refined notion of that. Awesome. Let's see if this works. So if I click and drag outside, and if I double click outside, it does not work. If I click and drag inside, and if I double click inside, it does work. And that's, ladies and gentlemen, is how you do a button in JSFX. We are baking the pie from scratch. We just invented the universe. That's how I feel when I'm doing JSFX, especially this part. Especially the user interface, and I guess especially the mouse and keyboard stuff. It's so bare bones. I am. I can actually see myself too, which is, I guess, a good thing, because sometimes I do silly things like put code behind my face or something. It's nice that I can see myself and I can see the chat, but the screen is super small, the teleprompter is super small, so I cannot really read the chat, but I can see that there are new messages. Yeah, I got hit by a car. It wasn't a big deal. The car was very slow, but it did bend the front wheel of my bike. The guy was just getting out of the parking lot, and I was biking on the main street, and he didn't see me. And he thought that he was right, so we just sweared at each other for 5 minutes, and he had a scratch on his car. I will have to replace the wheel of my bike, and then we went our merry ways. So, well, it is what it is. But I am good, okay? I did not get hurt. No one got hurt, except maybe our feelings. Yeah, everything is okay. Swearing at people in swearing at people on the streets, people who you don't know in Portugal, is surprisingly common. I don't know, it just happens. Let's not get into that. But there is something else that I can get into, which is a tangent. It has nothing to do with the code we are writing, but it's something interesting that Bo asked about. And he asked about this on the Discord channel, so I know that Fotis and Bo are there, but if you watching this are not on the Discord channel, go right now to the link in the description below. The link is to my website, and in there you'll find a link to join us on the Discord chat, where you can hang out with all of us. Anyway, Bo had this question that, if I understand correctly, is why do we have to do so much work in JSFX to get a hold of previous samples? So in the waveform display, we have to know samples from the past to draw them. And we had to come up with our own data structure to hold these samples. And we had to come up with our own mechanism for handling, pushing into, where is it? It's here. We had to come up with our own mechanism for pushing samples into that space, and then for getting samples out of that space, and for handling all of that. Do I understand your question correctly? Is that a good explanation of the question, Bo? Because that's how I understood it. Why do we have to do so much work to get a hold of previous samples? Since it's such a common thing for you to want to do. Like if you do a delay, of course, you will want previous samples. But also if you're doing filters, you will want at least a couple previous samples. And any kind of algorithm really, except perhaps wave shapers, the very simple ones, they always depend on previous samples. And the question is, why don't JSFX and, for that matter, JUCE and other plugins just give you arbitrarily many old samples? So perhaps you would be able to say, I want 1,000 samples at a time. And then you would just receive a block of 1,000 samples, or maybe you would have access to the previous 1,000 samples. And this could be independent of the buffer size, because when you are in JSFX, you have to handle samples one by one. Even though it actually runs block by block, it will run the sample section, so you will have access to the samples one by one. But in JUCE, you receive samples in blocks, the buffers, right? So if your buffer size is 256, you will receive 256 samples. So that's more in line with what Bo is asking, but you may not want to depend on the buffer size. Perhaps your algorithm needs 1,000 samples always. Or if you have a delay thing, even more. So why don't libraries, JSFX, just give you that for free? Here's my answer. I think, first of all, it is a nice thing to want. I think that that would be a nice addition to JSFX, and perhaps even a nice addition to JUCE and other libraries. So why don't these things exist? Well, because they don't, but I think they should. But why do designers do this? I think I have some clues. I don't know. I am not the designer of JSFX, and I haven't come up with JUCE either, but I have a clue. And that is, first of all, you would have to have some sort of mechanism to communicate how many samples from the past you want. But that's okay. You could just have some sort of function you call, some sort of, I guess in JSFX, we could have some sort of options on the preamble before the init section, something like that. But I think the real reason is that in most cases, you don't just want to have old samples as they are. You want to do something to the old samples and then store them in some sort of data structure, like an array, list, or something like that. Let me give you examples of what I mean. In the waveform display, we want to be able to hold like 10 seconds into the past, but we don't need all the samples in those 10 seconds. So what we do in the waveform display is we collect samples until we have enough to draw one line, one vertical line. And then we just store where the line should start and where the line should end, but we don't store all the samples that made up that line. And that saves a lot of space. If our component here shows 5 seconds worth of audio, that's 5 times 48,000 to store all the samples. And we are only storing 10,000. That's much less than even 1 second. So we are computing stuff. In this case, we are computing the start and end of a line. And we store the result of that computation. We don't store the samples. So if you had some sort of facility to say, I want to have access to the previous 48,000 times 5 samples, then you would be wasting space. You would also be wasting CPU because you would need to loop over those samples over and over. So you would be wasting resources. And perhaps you could argue that, yeah, storing 10 seconds worth of audio for one plugin is no big deal, but that compounds. With more plugins and with more things you would like to do with these samples, you would need more and more storage and even more CPU for essentially no good reason. So it pays off to not just have access to previous samples, but to have some sort of higher level data structure that allows you to essentially have a circular buffer, right? Allows you to store computations from the past, not samples from the past, but perhaps the result of computations from the past, and to be able to circle around on that data structure and pretend that it is infinite, right? As long as you don't try to look infinitely into the past, right? As long as you are only interested in the previous 1000 samples, you can pretend that this is a data structure that goes along forever. You don't have to do all the bookkeeping. And that's where libraries come in. So that's why we have a library that we are working on. The intent of JSFX, as far as I understand, is to be very minimalistic, come with just the essential, the bare bones. I mean, look at all the handstanding we have to do to have a single button on the interface, right? It comes with the bare minimum. And then it's expected that people will come up with the abstractions that they need, and they will come up with the abstractions in the way that they like to use. So what the exercise we are going through of coming up with our own circular buffer, for instance, is sort of the intention of JSFX, as far as I understand. And in JUCE, I really think that there is some sort of circular buffer. Oh, I'm on the circular counter, not the circular buffer. I really think that there is some sort of circular buffer in JUCE, but I don't know. I tried to look it up and I couldn't find anything, and I ended up just using my own little implementation. And I guess that many people do that. Geraint Love has his own library. Jetting from Chow, Tape, and the Matrix Delay and whatnot, he also has his own library. So I guess everyone comes up with their own little widgets and utilities that they like. And that's what we are doing here on this channel as well. So that's another reason. You give people just the bare essentials, they come up with abstractions that they like. So there you go. I think that that's why libraries and languages don't give you the arguably useful, but not necessarily ideal notion of accessing previous samples to save space, because you don't necessarily want to just store samples from the past. You may want to store the result of computations, and to perhaps allow people to come up with their own abstractions, which is good and also bad, of course. And I want to give one more example, perhaps to drive the point home. Another example of why you would not want to just have access to samples from the past, but have some sort of circular buffer data structure. And I guess the canonical example of why you would want to have access to samples in the past is a delay plugin. So in the delay plugin, if you had access to samples in the past, it would be very straightforward to just replay those samples, right? But here's the thing. One of the things you would want in a delay plugin is the notion of feedback. And as soon as you have the notion of feedback, you're not really just replaying samples from the past. You are now also writing into this circular buffer, right? That's what the feedback is. You are writing into the circular buffer so that when you come back around, that will replay, perhaps attenuated, but it will replay. So again, it's the result of a computation. It's not really just having access to samples from the past. It's having access to computations from the past. So why don't people give you just access to previous samples? Because circular buffers are generally more useful. What do you think? Yeah, that goes for calculations in the past as well. An easy way to access that in a calc like way. Yeah, that makes sense. So in many papers, articles, books, you will see things like this. You will see, for instance, let's go to the good old RBJ cookbook. Here we are. So in this formula, it is taken for granted that you will have inputs. They are called X. So inputs, not just the current one, but also the past two ones, and that you have access to previous outputs as well. Outputs are the Y variable. And it's taken for granted that you can just access the current one and also the previous ones. And of course, if you want to implement this, you will have to do all this bookkeeping yourself. You will have to shift variables around, all of that yourself. So wouldn't it be nice if you just had arrays all over? I guess, but it's not exactly straightforward to know what variables you want to have access in the past and what variables you don't. And then it becomes complicated to communicate that intention to the language. So how would you come up with a way of communicating that the y variable you want to have access to 2 previous samples, the x variable you want to have access to 2 previous samples, but on your delay line you want to have access to the previous 1000 results of computation. So you would have to come up with all of this, I guess, this idiom to communicate this intention. And when you get to that point, you might as well just have an array or a circular buffer kind of data structure. I guess that's exactly what it boils down to. So perhaps it could be nice to have a language that is magic in the sense that when you use x n-1, it knows that it needs under the hood to store that for later and do all the bookkeeping for you. But I think, and perhaps there are languages like this. I don't know, Faust may do that. Faust is very high level. But in languages that inherit from C and C++, you don't want to waste any space, and you want to be as performant as possible, and you want to express things in a very machine-like way. So things like automatically figuring out that you need to have an array of 3 positions, or that you have to have 3 variables and you have to shift their values around. And detecting that automatically, it's definitely not in the ethos of C, C++, and JSFX as well, for that matter, right? The ethos of these languages is you give the programmers all the sharp knives and you let them run. I hope that gives you some insight into perhaps the history or the culture. It's not really just a technical question, right? It's also about how we want to communicate and express the ideas. So it goes way beyond just technicalities of C and C++. It gets into what problems people were trying to solve back in the 70s when they are creating C, and nowadays when they are updating the C++ standards and developing libraries like JUCE and creating languages like JSFX. Yeah, programmers running with knives and scissors. And of course, the rule is not that you shouldn't run with scissors. The rule is that you shouldn't trip. So that's the ethos of the C and C++ and JSFX, I guess, school of thought, so to speak. All right, that was a huge tangent, but I enjoyed talking about this. So thank you, Bo, for asking this, and I hope that this is either entertaining or helpful to you. All right, what else? We have very little time, so let's just try to find something real quick that we can say we have done and complete. But I think that I already fulfilled the promise of the title of the stream. When I said more sophisticated, I meant in the sense that we would constrain things to here and that we would have this little hover state as well. And I guess next time we will have to think about abstractions, because right now we have just one concrete instance of this button, so to speak. But we would want to have multiple of them. So we will either need to come up with a data structure or something. I think it will be a data structure that stores the state and that knows how to behave. So it knows what to do when you move your cursor around. Okay, so just one quick win and we'll wrap up. So yesterday, I implemented the notion of dragging to change the zoom, but I did not constrain the thing. So you can go way up and you can even go way down, which is, I guess, even worse because you can go negative and then you flip the waveform around. Kind of cute, not the intention. And we have a to-do here. Yeah, this function that we have not implemented this function, and that's why the slider is going in the wrong range. So let's implement this function because it's supposed to be a single line. I hope I get this right. I thought about it yesterday and a little bit today. I didn't test anything. I didn't look up anything, but I think I have an intuition of how this should go. Wish me luck. I think we'll do this in 2 steps. First, we will, I guess we're not calling this step anymore. We're calling it increment, right? Yeah, we're calling it increment. So first, I want to quantize the value so that it is in the increment steps. And what do I mean by quantization in this sense? I mean that if the value is something like 3.56, but we have a minimum so if the value is 3.56, we have a minimum of 3. A maximum of don't care. And an increment of 0.1. That means that we should first quantize this value or round this value to 3.5. Then we should constrain this. So perhaps the maximum is not don't care, it is 3. I want to say 3.3. So in that case, we want to apply the maximum and get 3.3 out. And I want to do this in 2 steps because I, of course, made the example in such a way that the constraints apply. We are beyond the maximum. So we are capping, we are clipping to the maximum. But in general, you will be within bounds. So I want to do this in 2 steps. Quantize, clip. I guess this is quantize, this is clip. And we already have a function for clipping. I think that having a function to do quantization could also be really useful. So yeah, let's use the function that doesn't exist to implement slider, and then we will implement the function that doesn't exist. So it will go like this. We'll take the value. We'll first quantize the value given the minimum and the increment. And you may be wondering, why do I need the minimum here? Well, that's because in our case, the minimum is 3, so the quantization gets us there. But the minimum could be... I don't think it makes a lot of sense, but think about it. The minimum could be this. So when you quantize, or when you take the increments here, you will go from 3.05 to 3.15 to 3.25 and so forth. So the result of the, I guess I will put 7 here just so the numbers are different. So the result of the quantization should not be 3.5. It should take this little number in account as well when doing the quantization, because perhaps this 6 plus this 7 will get you into 3.6 instead of 3.5, if that makes any sense. I don't know if it makes any sense, but I think it does. Okay, I'm glad that that explains it. Oh, I must admit that I have not tested the whole filter after our stream together. Okay. Yeah, I saw that that was released, but I haven't really used it. Console 8, I mean. Yeah, that's what I wanted to do too, but then we didn't have the Burton EQ curve analyzer installed to play around with the whole filter. But that is probably going to be an interesting exploration. All right, so we do the quantization, and that will get us here. Then we do the clipping. we clip the value between the minimum and the maximum. So this implements the slider truncation thingamajig, but we don't have a quantize function. So let's implement a quantize function. And I guess truncation will be a special case of quantization. So I'll put the implementation of quantization above. And I'll leave myself a to-do to use quantize, if possible. It may not be, I don't know. For now, let's not think about the case where the minimum interacts with the value in that weird way I explained. I explained that how you could have more decimal digits and they would interact in different ways in terms of quantization. Let's not worry about that right now because it makes my brain hurt. But think about minimum. I'll leave myself this note to think about it and see what we will do with it. So let's do just quantization, pretending that the minimum is 0 in such a way that the increment and the value don't interact in weird ways. So how do we do quantization? I guess we think of it like this. We take the value and we multiply by the increment. And this will give us something in terms of increments. In other words, how many increments do we have in value, right? That's the meaning of multiplication. How many increments do I have in value? And then let's say that the increment is let's say that the increment is 0.1 and the value is 3.55. So when we multiply value and increment, we are asking the question, how many 0.1s do I have in 3.55? Is that right? Or should I be dividing? I think I should be dividing. Yeah, right, I should be dividing. What am I saying? This will give us the notion of how many 0.1s do I have in 3.55. Yeah, there you go. I have a pie. I divide by 5 people. How much pie will each people have? Ugh, that analogy doesn't hold well. Anyway, so that will give me a number. It is fractional, like 1.5. I don't know. I haven't really made the math. So 1.5 is not the division of these two values. But anyway, so I do this division and the result will be a fraction. I take the floor of that fraction and that will give me the integer part of the fraction. And then I multiply by increment and that result is guaranteed to be a multiple of increment. So we have quantized the value. And that's how you quantize something. I think that that works. I don't know if it works, but I hope it does. So we'll have two things to look at. The first is when I drag this around, this should have only one decimal digit. So like 8.2, just one decimal digit. That is the quantization. And also it should be within the bounds. It should not go beyond or below the boundaries. And that is the clipping. I think that that will work. I really hope so. Yeah, it does work. It's weird that it's moving steps of 2, I think, but I will not care about this. It is working. I'll take it. And there you have it. We did some user interface. We made buttons, so to speak, work. We made at least one button work. It has a hover stage. It responds to double click. It's beautiful. It's lovely. And we also did some quantization truncation, and we talked about arrays and circular buffers and why JSFX and C and C++ don't give you higher level facilities for stuff. So I think that was a good run. And with that, we are ending the stream for this week. So thank you, Foshis and Bo, for joining me on the chat. Thank you everyone else who is not on the chat but watching this perhaps in the future or right now. And have a lovely weekend. I will see you again on Monday, probably. Make sure that you subscribe and ring the bell and I don't know, send me some money on Patreon. And then I will tell you when I'm streaming next time. So probably Monday. See you then. Bye. My keyboard shortcut didn't work again. Let's end the stream the silly way. Bye. Thank you for watching the stream. You know how great it has been. Or maybe it sucked, and I am glad that you stuck with me. And soon we'll all be back together for some more coding or talking or chilling. The next time I'll be streaming.